The two gleams of light shone in the driver's wide eyes, and his lips looked moist and satisfied. Good food, he said. Dead meat, cold but good. I said too much already. Besides, nowhere's safe. Not here, not on this side of the mist. But his eyes flickered once to the left and out into the dripping skeleton forest. Ollie followed his glance. There was a little gap in the fog and on the driver's side of the road. Between the trees was a beginning of a path. They can move in the daytime, said the bus driver, almost too low for her to hear. Just not while anyone's looking. They have to stand in the sunshine world too, you see, to keep the door open, and that makes them weaker. More rules in the sunshine world, after all, but on this side of the mist at night, there's only his rules. They'll grab you if you can. Now, go away! Mr. Easton came bustling into the door of the bus. Ollie, he said, what are you doing up here? Go back to your seat. There's no need to worry. But he said, Ollie began and stopped. The bus driver was sitting behind the wheel looking straight ahead, and now he seemed perfectly normal. Thanks for the snack, he said. He crumbled up the wax paper, dipped his head to lick his fingers, and seemed to appear slyly at her beneath his eyelids. That was nice of you, Ollie, said Mr. Easton, looking surprised. To think of the driver, but better go back to your seat now. Off you go. But Ollie stopped again. Mr. Easton looked just as he always had, cheerful and red-faced. Suddenly he seemed ridiculous to imagine monsters in the forest, to imagine that her book was anything but a story. The bus driver was joking. Her imagination had gotten away from her, just like her dad always said. Ollie went back to her seat. Mr. Easton was talking with the bus driver, although Ollie couldn't hear what they were saying. Finally, Mr. Easton said to the 6th grade, looking irritable, well, phones don't work and I'm not having any luck with the bus. I'm going to just nip back up the road to the farm and call for help from there. Mr. Jones here. Mr. Easton gave the driver an annoyed look. Has a bum ankle and I'll have to make the walk. Shouldn't be more than 20 minutes, so y'all mind the driver and I'll be back before you know it. Anyone who tries anything at all while I'm gone will be in detention until Christmas. He popped out the door. Ollie wanted to warn him, but to warn him of what? She didn't say anything. The thud of Mr. Easton's footsteps went the length of the bus, following the way they had come. Then the sound was lost in the fog. Just like that, they were alone. A hush fell on the bus and Ollie peered out the window, but couldn't see Mr. Easton. It was as though he'd been swallowed, the mist creeping closer. Mike and Phil began busily sticking Coco Zittner's long hair in the back of her seat with a wad of chewing gum. The lights flickered again. Ollie's watch chimed once, softly against her wrist. She glanced down. 39.22, said the countdown now. Run, said the compass displaying, flickering. Ollie's mouth was dry. Get out of the gray evening, into the misty forest, run, still flickered beneath the crackled screen. Overhead lights wavered. The driver sat perfectly still. Coco began her move, her head in confusion, and Mike and Phil sat back looking innocent. Coco's ferocious scream shot through the bus. Explanations and laughter erupted as Coco yanked her hair up from the seat back, trilling sticky strings of gum. Coco began to cry. I could warn everyone, Ollie thought, but warn them of what? She was shaking with nerves and indecision. She looked out the window again. Straight ahead was the road. To the right was the forest. Out of the left-hand window was a vast, whispering cornfield. Ollie's stomach jumped. The field was full of scarecrows. Were there more of them? No, impossible. Not impossible, Ollie thought shakily. Very improbable. Ollie's cheek checked her phone one more time. No service. Well, she thought determinedly, I don't want to stay on this stupid bus anyway. Ollie put on her rain jacket and her hat, and she hoisted her polka dot backpack higher on her shoulders. What are you doing, Ollie? Asked Brian. Coco was still crying. People were shouting questions at the bus driver, but he just sat there unmoving, 2 hands on the wheel. The day's sun was only a memory. Ollie said, the driver said, best get moving. I'm moving. What? Said Brian Ware. Mr. Easton said, but Ollie wasn't listening. She stood up and went to the front of the bus and looked back at her classmates. In a little place like Ben Withers, everyone knew everyone else. You went to school with the same people since kindergarten. Ollie was pretty sure no one was going to believe her, and she barely believed it herself. But what if it was true? All of it. The mist and the twilight and the bus driver's warning. Mr. Easton's gone, said Ollie, facing down at the bus aisle. She didn't think she could shout over the noise, but she didn't try. But the people in the back, shh, each other anyway. I think maybe he's not coming back. A startled pause, and then they laughed at her, or just rolled their eyes or looked concerned. Poor Ollie, you know she cracked last year. Come on, said a blurry chorus of voices. He just went to the farm. He'll be back soon. He's not gone. He can't be gone. Gone, Ollie snapped. The words seemed to fall like a rock right in all the noise. Everyone heard it, and a small awkward stillness spread through the bus. He went into the mist, she added. Now it's almost dark. She could see her own breath now. Ollie realized the bus was getting cold. The engine turned off. The heater wasn't running. Do you hear the driver, she asked. Best get moving, he said. Another murmur ran through the bus. Get moving? What is she saying? But Mr. Easton said he'll be right back. Oh, it's just Ollie. You know Our phones don't work, Ollie said, her voice getting stronger. I don't think Mr. Easton's coming back, and I don't think whoever comes will want to help. A few of the people were smiling as though she made it a good joke. Others looked concerned, and the bus driver gave Ollie a sly grin. Nice try, Brian. Battersby sat with his arms crossed and a frown on his face. Okay, said Ollie. I said it. I think you should listen, and I'm going to try and get away now. She put her foot on the first step. Little girl, said the bus driver. She turned around, looked into the eyes like two eggs, felt a fresh jolt of fear. Avoid the large places at night, he said. Keep to the small. What does that mean? Ollie demanded. The driver looked around and then whispered so that she could barely hear. They are strong at night, remember? They are clever, grabbing hands, but stiff. They can't grab you if they can't reach you at night. Who are they? Ollie whispered, but the driver didn't answer. He only reached out, pulled the lever that opened the doors. It was getting darker. The trees dipped. And although it wasn't exactly raining, more of a thick, sticky mist like it had been outside of a cloud. Ollie had been inside a cloud once, and her mother had taken her paragliding. Her mother loved flying, any kind of flying. Her father said, no, Ollie's too little, but her mother had only said, don't worry, Raj. I've taken Ollie anyway. Ollie's mom wasn't scared of anything. But maybe she'd been scared of that last flight in the little single engine. Ollie dreamed of the crash, even though she hadn't seen it. She hadn't seen the fire afterwards or the bits of broken planes stuck in a tree, the things that haunted her in nightmares. She only overheard her relatives talking about it. Her father had brought the cracked watch to her at school, holding it tight in his sweaty fist. He sat her down right there on the bench next to the hickory tree. Ollie had heard him out, not saying anything, heard him out until she couldn't bear to listen anymore. And then she yelled and grabbed the watch and ran for her bike, pedaled to her house. Never mind the freezing rain. She had run upstairs soaking wet, shivering, to hide in her window seat. She hadn't cried. She couldn't bear to cry. Crying meant it was all real, and she didn't want it to be real. Instead, she opened a book at random, read until her eyes went blurry, and then read some more. She hadn't stopped for days. She hardly ate. She didn't sleep at all. Her dad would come up red-eyed from crying himself, tap on her door, leave her food, and go away. She wouldn't talk to him. She barely saw him. He brought her pies, cakes, all her favorite things, and she didn't touch them. Maybe, she kept thinking, when she came back from one of those other worlds, when she woke up from a book dreaming, she would come back to the world where her mother wasn't dead. She hadn't. But she kept her mother's watch, even though it was broken. Ollie never took it off until she got home at night. And then it spent its nights under her pillow. Now, as Ollie stepped into the ground, she glanced down and at it, 27 and 4 seconds. The watch said now. Run! Sunset at 6:03, Ollie remembered. 27 minutes sounded about right. She wouldn't have to trust it. Maybe the advice was good too. Run! Ollie bit a knuckle. Consider the place where the driver had pointed to the little gap in the fog, the skinny path. There was a scarecrow on the side of the road. It was peering around a tree. One garden rake hand uplifted, wearing an old black suit. It looked like the scarecrow whose hat Brian had adjusted. That couldn't be right. Hey, Ollie! Ollie shrieked and whipped around. Coco Zittner hopped awkwardly out of the last step of the bus right into the green puddle. Ollie glanced down at her watch. 24 minutes and 8 seconds. Are you really leaving? Coco asked, splashing over. Yes, said Ollie, and the back of her neck was prickling. She found herself keeping an eye on the black-suited scarecrow. I'm sorry about earlier, Coco said. It's okay, said Ollie, and she was barely listening. She had decided. She strode towards the woods. Where are you going? Coco asked, hurrying up beside her. Why are you going so fast? The woods, said Ollie, trying to sound surer than she felt. The bus driver said, best get moving. I'm moving. Coco bit her lips. I'm going with you. They're too mean on the bus. She showed Ollie the gummy end of her hair and her lip quivered. And I'm scared, she added. This place is weird. Okay, Ollie said, a little relieved that someone was coming with her. She wasn't the only one afraid, even if it was Coco Zittner. If we go back into the woods, she said, trying to make the decision before more rational than it was, we can angle back towards the farm. There's probably a shortcut in there. We'll be back before we know it. Look, a path, said Coco, pointing to the gap in the trees. That way. Ollie had meant to go that way, but she didn't like Coco taking charge. Well, yes, said Ollie, but Coco didn't hear. She was already running ahead, slipping in the puddles. Ollie followed. They crossed the grassy, overgrown space between the road and the trees. To get to the path, they had to pass the black-suited scarecrow. It did look a lot like the one Brian had pointed out earlier. Maybe they've made two identical ones. It stood there with mist lapping around its knees, smiling blankly. Just as they reached the first jumpy shadows of the forest, another voice yelled, Hey, wait! Both girls turned around. Coco seemed to shrink into herself, and then she scowled and crossed her arms. No boys allowed, she told Brian as he jogged across the asphalt. Brian raised a brow. This isn't summer camp, Coco Puff, he said. Have you two completely lost it? Mr. Easton said to wait. He's coming right back. You're going to get in so much trouble. I don't think Mr. Easton's coming back, said Ollie. It's almost dark. Don't call me Coco Puff, cried Coco. Her blue eyes had filled up. She stroked her wounded hair. So what if it gets dark, said Brian to Ollie. Way smarter to stay inside in one place. Someone will come tonight, but the woods will be cold and you'll get lost, break an ankle, fall into the river. Don't be dumb. Ollie knew the same things Brian knew about what could happen if someone was alone in the forest at night. He saw her hesitate. Okay, now you're getting it, he said. Come back to the bus. They're all in there saying you've lost it. But I don't believe it. Come back to the bus. Ollie looked down at her watch. 18 minutes and 3 seconds. Run! The word still wavered on her watch's cracked face. No, she said to Brian. We have to go now. She headed for the woods again. You stay here, added Coco to Brian, shrill. She hurried after Ollie. Mist curled around the first of the tree trunks, crept softly up the road. Brian stood where they'd left him. Ollie paused between the first of the tree trunks, turned back. I think you come with us, Brian. Best get moving, the bus driver said. I think something bad is going to happen. Brian just stared at her like he had never heard anything so ridiculous. The sky was the color of the wet slate roof now. Shadows seemed to be creeping out from the trees, creeping out to the noisy bus. The driver was staring right at them in the driver's side window, his eyes round and blank as marbles. Ollie shrank instinctively into the shadow of the trees. The driver, unsmiling, pointed once to the forest at their backs. Come on, Ollie whispered to Coco. We need to go. All right, Cougars, that was a huge chapter. Tune in Tuesday, because Friday and Monday are a holiday, for the next chapter of Small Spaces. Have a good one, everybody.